Anatoly Popko. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, the difficult part in that question is a little bit. 38 totally blind NVDA users for last, 4 years plus something. And I've been always very loud and articulate about the accessibility, digital accessibility in Russia here. So I live in Moscow. I am one of the co-authors of Russian digital accessibility standards. It's like we took WCAG 2.1 and basically translated it into Russian. And now, since April 1st, 2020, it was enacted. So it is an official document now. So, and I take a little bit of pride that I was a tiny part of that, accessibility movement. So, and of course, I help Russian charities to run various projects related to blind and visually impaired users, and one of them does require NVDA certification. So that is cool.
That is cool. So why are you using NVDA certification? What do you have Russian certified NVDA users for?
Well, actually, there is a very strong Russian-speaking community of blind and visually impaired users. There is a trend, very noticeable one, to move from commercial screen reader solutions to NVDA. And so I would assume, I don't have any exact figures, but my estimation is that NVDA is the primary screen reader for the majority of Russian blind users, Windows computer users. There's a fund, and the fund is called Arts, Science and Sports. And one of its programs, so subdivisions, is called Special View. And basically those wonderful young ladies behind the Special View program, they came to me and tried to address me with the question if there is anything that I would do having the resources for blind and visually impaired community in Russia, and especially in terms of computer skills, so to say. And yes, I came up with the idea to actually unite a few prominent Russian IT trainers, because I know a lot of them throughout Russia, and to start one-on-one distance learning sessions, trying to expand the current level of expertise and knowledge of using the technology. Because I also run a Dialogue in the Dark project, and I really hate it when blind people avoid using various technology which they could have been using, but they just avoid it for some reasons that they don't know how to use it, and that really decrease their performance. That annoys me enormously, and I just think that something needs to be done about that.
You said NVDA is now the most popular screen reader in Russia. Do you know why that is? Is it a cost issue? Is it
one of the major issues? Yes, it is a cost related, of course. The NVDA is actually a good product. It has updates, 3 or 4 updates per year. It runs fast, and there's no really point in not using it. That's the key, I guess.
So you mentioned Dialogue in the Dark. Tell me a little bit more about Dialogue in the Dark.
Dialogue in the Dark, it has a few, that's what we call formats. So one of them is business workshops, where sighted persons are taken to the complete darkness, and they conduct just a real business workshop to develop their soft skills. So that's the key objective. Another type of events is exhibition. So there is a specially darkened space, and sighted people enter it, and of course they instantly stop relying on their vision, which usually provides up to 80 or even more % of their information about their surroundings, and then they have to cope anyhow with the reality. So while in exhibition they go from one location to the other, and then They just, and the locations may vary a lot. So there's a street, there's a park, there's a summer house, there's a short trip on a boat, with the real water outside, with all this kind of stuff. And then they have some kind of they go to some bar, buy maybe some soda or snacks, and then that's an hour long journey actually. And once they come out, they have a chance to talk to the their blind guide, to ask whatever questions might arise out of their experience. And that's also something very, very important, as as important as personal experience can be.
Fantastic. And you're also involved in G3ICT's Smart Cities for All.
A little bit, yes, because I'm trying to push Russian IT community for greater digital accessibility, and those efforts were recognized by G3ICT and Smart Cities for All program, and they kind of approached me and asked if I would be willing to to take my efforts on the next level. So, and I said I happily agreed, and after the interview they accepted me in their country representatives. So I'm representing Russia. I really am a vocal person. I try to be reasonable and sensible, but when I see how much can actually blind and visually impaired people can do, and the only reason why they aren't doing that is just digital barriers that could be easily or relatively easy put away, that just always strikes me as some unfairness, some deep unfairness on a very deep level. And I start to ask, to convince people to make their products accessible, and to get them acquainted with screen reading softwares. And I always say, well, if you use Windows, then just download NVDA screen reader. If you use any other platform like maybe macOS, just press Command F5 key. So just take a look at how it's working. And so far I'd say that there have been a few successes on that way. So we're moving forward.
Fantastic. Moving forward, that's good. So that brings us back to your project, working for the Art, Science and Sports Charity Foundation as the accessibility consultant for the Special View program.
Yep, and so the idea behind the project is to actually get together those users, blind and visually impaired users who want to expand their knowledge, IT-related skills, and those blind and visually impaired IT trainers who can teach how to use the computer. And that's the idea behind. And one of the questions that arises right away, and how can we assure that those IT trainers themselves have the expertise and knowledge that they can use the computers good enough. And NVDA certification became one of the first challenges for those IT specialists to overcome, because that was a challenge. That was the first thing I myself did. So I passed the exam and thought that it was mildly difficult. Well, it was difficult, but not so much. And I thought that, okay, well, if IT trainers who would teach blind and visually impaired community in Russia would have this internationally recognized certification, that would be just cool. And so I kind of set that as an entry barrier. So all those people who want to train others have to pass the exam, because they live all across Russia, and I think only one of them is in Moscow. So all the other 10 are located in various other cities from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok and everywhere in between, in Yekaterinburg, in Nizhny Novgorod, in Ulan-Ude, so just in any cities. And they were passing the exam, and I really am proud to say that 11 of my peers, of my totally blind Russian speaking and Russian living users, NVDA users, have been able to pass the exam. And actually a little more, because when I shared what I was doing with friends of mine, because like I have a lot of blind and visually impaired friends all over Russia, even those who weren't particularly interested in becoming an IT trainer, but they kind of like were, okay, what do you say, the NVDA certification system? Okay. And I just like, and I know for sure that at least, well, a couple of guys who are not directly engaged in my project, they also went to NVDA certification system and passed the exam, just, to make sure that their knowledge of, the best screen reader for Windows platform is sufficient enough, just, to get self-esteem. That's funny.
That's fantastic. It really goes to show the dedication of the people you've got working with you there. So the project that you've got started there to teach others, what will you be teaching?
The topic range is actually quite extensive, because like there's not only Windows OS as itself, like just basic functions like changing options and using File Explorer and this kind of stuff, but there's also, of course, various internet related functions, starting with internet browsing, email clients. Then of course there is Skype, Zoom, and all those communication systems. And then there's a huge block related to Google applications, Google Suite, Google Documents, Google Sheets, Google Calendar, tasks, Gmail itself, whatever. Because like those pieces of software, they are being used in corporate environment just about everywhere. And if there is a chance, a possibility for employment for a blind and visually impaired person, then those tools are a must to master, so to say. Because like there's no way of avoiding this kind of software. Because like, yeah. And of course, we also are aiming at providing some knowledge for Mac OS X operating system, and we even want to go as far as to start actually to support blind and visually impaired freelancers who want to organize and to create their own websites, so using some content management system like WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, or whatever, you name it. That is going to be a real help to blind and visually impaired Russian community, because they would have access to the knowledge and expertise of prominent IT Russian trainers. So that's important. Those IT trainers who are blind and visually impaired persons themselves, they would get an opportunity for vocational employment, so they would be able to earn some money. And those corporate structures that are responsible enough to hire blind and visually impaired persons, they can just address that project with the proposal to train their blind personnel to use the software, so they wouldn't have any more doubts than necessary if this blind person can use this particular software. I think also that might also be important. But the idea behind the project is that the charity foundation actually covers the costs of training sessions. So it pays to the IT trainers, and blind and visually impaired users receive knowledge free of charge. The only requirements are their motivation. Hopefully that would give opportunities to those people who cannot really get hold of any substantial knowledge for their education or employment otherwise.
Definitely, and that ties in with our own philosophy at NV Access, that the cost for a blind user to be able to use the computer should be no more than for anybody else, which is exactly why we make NVDA available for free to begin with.
Yeah, and I would like to take this opportunity, if I may, to really thank you guys. Thank you for your hard work and dedication to NVDA project, because it's been evolving rapidly, and the work you're doing is really fantastic. And I'm sure that there is a lot of Russian, I know for sure that there's just hundreds, if not thousands, of blind Russian users that would gladly say thank you for your work, for your dedication, for your NVDA, because it really does make a lot of difference in how we use computers, why we use, where we use them. It does open doors for education, for employment, and it kind of like lays the foundation for us to start talking about digital accessibility, because right now we can address all the interested developers. Okay, take a look at NVDA website and just download that free screen reader software and just try to run it. See for yourself what your website or your application looks like, and we can use it just freely on any computer, and that's a lot. That really does make huge difference. And now we that motivates at least me to talk about digital accessibility, to push the corporate environment, the IT developers forward, and to create even more education and employment opportunities for the blind and visually impaired. That's what we're doing here. That's important.
That is important, and that's a really fantastic initiative that you've got going there.
Well, thank you.
And thank you.